What if the greatest mystery of human existence, the sudden appearance of complex consciousness, is not a tale of gradual evolutionary ascent, but the narrative of a calculated, deliberate intervention? We stand today at a peculiar crossroads, peering back into the deep history of our species, only to find a colossal gap, a sudden acceleration from primitive hominid to sophisticated civilization that baffles conventional timelines. It is this fundamental dissonance, this whisper that something profound is missing from the official record, which compels us to turn our gaze away from established academia and toward the oldest known echoes of human memory, the cuneiform tablets of Sumer. Our discomfort begins with the recognition of an unnerving anomaly. Approximately 6,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, complexity seemed to erupt fully formed. Writing, complex legal systems, monumental architecture, advanced astronomy, mathematics, medicine, all these keystones of civilization appeared, seemingly overnight, with no discernible preparatory phase, no slow crawl from simpler systems. It is as if the complete instruction manual for advanced society was delivered, rather than painfully accumulated across millennia. This sudden quantum leap into organized society is the foundation upon which the deepest questions regarding our origins must be built, compelling us to ask, if humanity did not climb the ladder of civilization step by agonizing step, who provided the ladder and why? The Sumerians, creators of this first dazzling light in the historical darkness, did not claim to have invented their knowledge. Their meticulous, detailed records, etched into clay, insist with unsettling consistency that their wisdom was given to them. It was a gift, a heritage imparted by powerful, non-human entities who descended from the heavens. These accounts, often labeled as mere mythology by modern reductionism, were, for the Sumerians themselves, literal history. They documented the lineage, the purposes, and the conflicts of the Sky People with the same gravity and detail that we might apply to a presidential biography or a historical chronicle of an empire. If this initial curiosity about the anomalous leap of Sumer resonates with a forgotten corner of your intellectual landscape, if these whispers touch a chord of recognition that standard history failed to strum, then perhaps we share a fundamental curiosity about the nature of our own existence. Pause. Reflect on this strange historical jump, and consider carrying this reflection forward with us, focusing your entire attention on the details to come. These ancient texts are dense, layered with concepts that challenge our current paradigms, and require a willingness to engage fully in this journey of recognition and potential cognitive shift. Let us know below, with a simple phrase like, "the anomaly," if you too sense this profound historical discomfort. This investigation is far more profound than passive viewing. It is an active participation in unlocking a shared, suppressed memory. We invite you to join this collective scrutiny by subscribing, ensuring you do not miss the subsequent parts of this exhaustive investigation. The Sumerian chronicles introduce us directly to those beings, referring to them as the Anunnaki, a name that translates powerfully, unequivocally, as those who from heaven to earth came. This is where the narrative shifts from mere archaeological curiosity to profound metaphysical and genetic inquiry. These beings, we are told, arrived on Earth during a specific celestial cycle, long before the proliferation of modern humanity seeking a precious resource. The texts describe a highly technological, hierarchical society facing a planetary crisis on their home world, a planet some scholars hypothesize corresponds to the celestial body known in Sumerian cosmology as Nibiru, or the planet of the crossing. This concept immediately plunges us into the realm of deep time and cosmic cycles, suggesting that the timing of their intervention was not random, but dictated by predictable astronomical mechanics, periodic returns that bring their world into closer proximity to ours. The sheer volume of documentation detailing the Anunnaki's presence is difficult to dismiss. We are not dealing with a single fragmented myth, but with thousands of recovered cuneiform tablets that meticulously map out the geography of their landing sites, the Eden, their initial industrial operations, the mining colonies in Southeast Africa, and the intricate political struggles between their leading deities, Enlil and Enki. These weren't divine figures in the sense of abstract, omnipotent creators. They were described as flesh and blood rulers, technologically superior, burdened by their own mortality, albeit stretched over vast spans of time, and requiring labor to complete their mission. The extraction of gold, which the texts suggest was needed to repair the atmosphere of their distant home world. It is here, in the necessity of securing compliant labor, that the Sumerian narrative intersects explosively with the fundamental question of human DNA. The tablets describe a critical juncture where the indigenous primitive hominids already present on Earth were deemed unsuitable for the rigorous demands of the mines. The Anunnaki leadership, particularly the chief scientist Enki and the medical officer Ninti, often associated with the title Mama, undertook a project. This project was not the creation of life from pure nothingness, but rather a genetic fusion, a splicing of the Anunnaki's own sophisticated genome with the DNA of the Earth's existing primates. The stated goal was to create an improved worker, a Lulu Amalu, the primitive worker, or more poignantly, the Adamu. This account offers a startlingly advanced description of genetic engineering, centuries before the discovery of the double helix. The texts speak of binding the essence, of mixing the clay, and of implantation into surrogate carriers, terms which, when stripped of their ancient metaphorical covering, sound remarkably like modern concepts of gene splicing and in vitro fertilization. The unsettling recognition here is that our origin story, as preserved by the very people who founded civilization, defines Homo sapiens not as nature's gradual masterpiece, but as a deliberate hybrid, a specialized organism designed for manual labor, possessing just enough intelligence to follow complex commands, yet potentially lacking the full expanded lifespan and unrestricted knowledge of its creators. This genetic theory, derived wholly from ancient texts, casts a shadow over the missing link problem that still plagues evolutionary biology. The abruptness with which Homo sapiens appears in the fossil record, distinct from its ancestors, may be explained not by a random evolutionary leap, but by a sudden, decisive laboratory event. The Garden of Eden, known in the tablets as the E, takes on the aspect of a biological laboratory or experimental zone, not a blissful paradise of mythological lore. It was the place of the experiment, the crucible where two disparate biological lineages were fused to solve an industrial crisis. If we pause and consider this possibility, that the unique complexity of our brains and the seemingly vestigial elements within our DNA might represent the residual markers of a non-terrestrial lineage, the entire narrative of human history shifts from comfortable familiarity to profound uneasiness. To embrace this framework is to accept the proposition that we carry within our very cellular structure a memory of the stars, an inheritance from beings who utilized Earth as a resource colony. The ancient texts are relentless in their detail, not only describing the creation itself, but the subsequent management and manipulation of the early human population. The famous story of the flood, for instance, described extensively in the Gilgamesh epic, which is not treated as divine wrath, but as a deliberate political decision by the Anunnaki Council, specifically Enlil, to eradicate their burdensome creation during a predetermined cyclical catastrophe. The narrative arc of the Anunnaki continues, detailing their eventual partial withdrawal from Earth, leaving behind a manipulated species and establishing proxy rulers, the first god-kings and priesthoods, to maintain control over the human populations and the resources. This sense of being watched or managed permeates the oldest mythologies, suggesting that the initial observers never truly left, but simply shifted their observational post. The tablets frequently hint at a future return, a completion of the cycle, and accountability demanded when their celestial timeline aligns once more with ours. The feeling of inherited unease, the nagging suspicion that we are merely subjects in a larger, unfinished experiment, is the legacy of this ancient heritage. If you have stayed with us through this initial establishment of the foundation, if the sheer weight of the Sumerian consistency compels you to recognize this deep historical possibility, then you are ready to venture further into the specifics. This is not casual viewing. This is an investigation into the deepest layers of self. If you resonate with the concepts of inherited legacy or cosmic cycles, let us know by commenting with the phrase, "The cycle continues." Your engagement is the energy that fuels this rigorous examination. We must now turn our focus toward the specific genetic mechanics described in the texts. translating the ancient metaphorical language of clay and essence into the modern vocabulary of chromosomes and helices. The most compelling challenge presented by the Sumerian records is their detailed implication that the Anunnaki imparted a specific, sophisticated aspect of their own biological code, granting the new creation the ability to breed, to utilize complex language, and to possess a certain form of higher reasoning, all while deliberately withholding the full genetic key to their own longevity and intrinsic knowledge. We are, according to their history, a species designed with a ceiling, an intentional evolutionary cap. This intentional limitation, this carefully calibrated splice, is the key to understanding the origins of the most mysterious and debated sections of the modern human genome. This is the direct link that moves this discussion from the realm of ancient history into the undeniable evidence of modern science, and it is precisely where we will begin the next stage of our investigation, examining the mysterious and often ignored findings of the Human Genome Project that seem to mirror the Sumerian accounts of a foreign intervention. If you feel the profound weight of this beginning, the unsettling recognition of a possible truth hidden in plain sight for millennia, then ensure you remain a part of this unfolding revelation. We highly value those who commit to understanding these intricate connections. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, giving us a like so that others seeking these truths can find this investigation, and prepare yourself for the next installment. Our journey continues, leading us directly from the clay tablets of Sumer into the modern scientific laboratories as we prepare to explore the genetic signatures that may still bear the mark of the Anunnaki. We invite you to stay tuned for part 2, which will appear on your screen shortly. Is it truly possible that the profound silence between two distinct chapters of human history hides the signature of a catastrophic intervention? We often look at the sheer, overwhelming complexity of our own biology, the staggering elegance of the double helix, and attribute its existence to the majestic randomness of 4 billion years of slow, grinding natural selection. Yet, when we turn the lens of investigation away from the purely biological record and focus instead on the oldest surviving narrative record, the clay tablets of Sumer, a profound sense of unease begins to settle. The timeline suddenly seems fractured, the evolutionary trajectory unnaturally accelerated. We recognize the whisper of something that simply does not fit the orthodox framework of slow, organic progress. The story of the Homo sapiens is a paradox wrapped in complexity. For millions of years, our hominid ancestors plodded along the vast, arid plains of prehistory, slowly improving their tools, their dexterity, their capacity for abstract thought. Then, around 300,000 years ago, something shifts. The cognitive leap is not a gentle slope, it is a sheer cliff face. We suddenly possess art, complex language, sophisticated social structures, and perhaps most tellingly, a deep, inherent, and inexplicable yearning for the metaphysical. This is where the ancient texts, previously dismissed as mere mythology, intersect violently with modern paleoanthropology. If the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, were indeed active participants in the formative stages of humanity, as the tablets assert, then that explosive cognitive jump is not a spontaneous biological miracle. It is an engineering project. The Sumerian chronicles speak not just of creation, but of necessity. They detail a specific crisis experienced by the celestial visitors, the need for a lesser being, a Lulu or primitive worker, to undertake the arduous labor of mining and infrastructure maintenance on Earth. This narrative completely reframes the origins of our DNA. We are not just the product of the Earth's primordial soup. We are the tailored byproduct of off-world genetic expertise, intended for a very specific and highly demanding purpose. This introduces the strangeness. We might be living out the residual programming of a millennia-old mandate, a mandate we have long forgotten, but whose genetic echo remains coded deep within our cellular architecture. To fully grasp the magnitude of this alleged intervention, we must hold the ancient text and the modern genetic map side by side. The gap in the evolutionary record, the sheer volume of missing links that should bridge the gap between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens, begins to look less like an accidental omission in the fossil record and more like a deliberate, perhaps necessary, alteration to the code. If the Anunnaki utilized their own advanced genetic knowledge, perhaps blending their essence with the existing hominid form, The resulting creature would possess capabilities that far outpaced its natural predecessor. The tablets claim this genetic blending was orchestrated primarily by the scientific minds among the visitors, specifically Enki, the master geneticist, and Ninti, the key medical officer, who experimented until they achieved the desired synthesis. The tale of the creation of the first human, Adapa, and the subsequent attempts and failures reads astonishingly like a laboratory transcript, albeit one cloaked in the grandiloquent language of the gods. Pause for a moment and allow that possibility to truly sink in. If we are an experiment, a meticulously engineered hybrid, then the very core of our being, our capacity for genius, our innate sense of division, our drive for both creation and destruction, must carry the indelible stamp of our progenitors. This is where the recognition turns to genuine uneasiness. We are not just observing ancient history, we are looking into the mirror of our own inherited nature. If you find this contemplation, this blurring of myth and molecule, as compelling and disquieting as we do, please take a moment to reflect on what this means for your own sense of self. Share your initial thoughts in the comments below, perhaps just the word hybrid or inheritance, so we know you are following this incredibly dense thread. And if you feel the pull of this narrative, if you sense the profound weight of this secret, ensure you are subscribed and have engaged with the video, because this investigation requires attentive minds who are willing to delve deeper into the shadow of history. The inquiry naturally leads us to the specific nature of that genetic legacy. Why did the creators, described as magnificent, powerful, and scientifically advanced, create us with such inherent flaws? The texts themselves provide a jarring answer. The original intention was not perfection, but utility. The first human models were designed for endurance and obedience, not longevity or enlightenment. The Sumerian tablets detail internal disputes among the Anunnaki. The conflict between Enlil, who favored strict control over the primitive workers, and Enki, who grew protective and saw potential for greater development. This ancient political conflict, the struggle over how much knowledge and lifespan to bestow upon humanity, may be reflected in the fragmented nature of our own DNA, particularly in the vast regions once dismissed as junk. Is this junk DNA the remnants of advanced Anunnaki coding that was either intentionally deactivated or simply left incomplete when the project was rushed or modified? This possibility introduces a deepening sense of estrangement. We are now confronted with the uncomfortable notion that the most fundamental aspects of our existence, our lifespan limitations, our susceptibility to disease, our short-lived memory cycles, might be less a result of biological accident and more the consequence of calculated genetic restriction. Consider the implication of the Shems, or the cycles described in the Mesopotamian cosmology. The Anunnaki were tied to the slow, predictable orbital return of their homeworld, Nibiru. Their schedule, their time on Earth, and thus the duration and scope of the human experiment, were dictated by vast astronomical periods. This link transforms them from mere gods into cosmic navigators, whose presence and influence waxed and waned according to a clock far grander than Earth's. The concept of the return is not just mythological, it is intrinsically linked to the stability and continuation of their operation here. If the human project was bound by these cosmic cycles, then the creators were, in essence, observers waiting for the optimal window for their next appearance or intervention. This sense of cyclical neglect and periodic restoration may explain the abrupt collapses and subsequent resurgence of advanced civilizations across our planet's history. Were the great forgotten civilizations, those whose ruins suggest technological sophistication far exceeding their established timelines, brief flashes of potential nurtured by returning patrons, only to be left abandoned when the astronomical mandate demanded their retreat? This suggests a pattern of planting, nurturing, and then withdrawing the key to knowledge, leading to a profound global amnesia after each cycle of cataclysm. The inherent duality of human nature, our capacity for transcendent spirituality existing side by side with destructive tribalism, can also be read as the direct inheritance of the conflict among the pantheon. Enki, often associated with wisdom, water, and creation, represents the potential for human enlightenment. Enlil, associated with harsh judgment, storms, and authority, represents the limitations and the necessary enforcement of order. If our DNA is truly a tapestry woven from the genes of these powerful conflicting figures, then our internal battles, our ethical quandaries, Our societal wars, our struggle between empathy and dominance, are merely the echoes of the celestial power struggle that birthed us. We are, quite literally, living out the family drama of our creators on a terrestrial stage. This recognition leads to a quiet but profound transformation of perspective. The search for the origins of our DNA is no longer a purely scientific endeavor. It becomes a quest to decipher the encoded political and spiritual intentions of the Anunnaki. We are looking for the genetic signature of a divine command. The ancient texts, particularly those detailing the flood narrative and the subsequent attempts to re-establish order, suggest a repeated need to reset the experiment, implying that the initial modifications were either too successful, granting humanity too much power, or fundamentally unstable. We must continue to follow the subtle hints left behind in ancient languages and archaeological anomalies to find the answer. What precise modifications were made, and more importantly, what genetic instructions remain dormant, waiting for the right cosmic signal to be reactivated. To those of you who have navigated this dense labyrinth of ancient cosmology and speculative genetics, if you have remained engaged through the unsettling weight of these potential truths, you possess the intellectual curiosity necessary for this investigation. If you have absorbed these concepts, knowing that the implications reshape everything we believe about our place in the universe, then you are a crucial part of this discovery process. Please, solidify your commitment to this ongoing investigation. Leave a like on this video to signal your engagement, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next phase. For those dedicated few who truly understand the gravity of this research, comment with the phrase Enki's Legacy below. In our next transmission, we will move beyond the narrative and into the realm of the tangible, examining the surprising linguistic and mathematical evidence that hints at advanced technology and scientific understanding embedded within these foundational texts. The path forward requires us to look not just at what the tablets say, but at the specific, scientific language they employ, a language that suggests the Anunnaki left behind not just a modified genome, but an operational manual. Join us as we prepare to decode the technical secrets hidden in plain sight. Does the sheer velocity of human development ever strike you as profoundly unnatural? We stand on the precipice of a chronological dissonance, staring back at the yawning gap that separates the slow, grinding inertia of millions of years of hominid evolution and the almost instantaneous leap into complex civilization that occurred just a few short millennia ago. It is a biological stutter, a historical anomaly that traditional science struggles to smooth over, often resorting to theories centered around a sudden, convenient convergence of environmental pressures and genetic luck. But when we place this staggering speed of cultural and technological emergence side by side with the ancient Sumerian accounts, the very foundation upon which the Anunnaki narrative is built, the concept of luck dissolves into the cold, sharp light of deliberate action. We left off contemplating the sheer necessity of the primitive worker, the Lulu Amalu, a being engineered not through the stately process of natural selection, but through the pressurized environment of an alien necessity. The texts speak less of a divine, benevolent creation and far more of a calculated biological response to a labor crisis. Think of the psychological implications inherent in this recognition. Our celebrated conscious existence, the very thing that sets us apart from all other life on this planet, may have been nothing more than an operational upgrade designed to increase efficiency in the gold mines of the Abzu. The strangeness intensifies when we begin to dissect the language of the tablets themselves. Forget the poetic translation of ancient creation myths. Instead, envision the cuneiform signs as chemical formulae. The descriptions of combining the essence of the Anunnaki, their own advanced genetic material, with the clay of the primitive earth creatures are not mere metaphors for mixing soil and water. This is the language of cross-species hybridization, a reference to gene splicing and cellular manipulation, rendered in the only available vocabulary of the time. This fusion, this blending of celestial and terrestrial stock, provided the catalyst for the Great Leap. It was not the creation of life from scratch, but rather the strategic modification of existing hominid templates, injecting the necessary intellectual architecture to facilitate understanding, communication, and most crucially, compliance. If you find yourself captivated by the scale of this investigation, feeling that peculiar tug of forgotten knowledge, that echo of recognition within your own deep memory, we invite you to pause and internalize this journey. This exploration is not about finding quick answers, but about engaging in deep reflection. If you recognize the gravity of what we are uncovering, if you feel compelled to continue unraveling this historical and genetic mystery with us, please consider lending your support. A simple like on this video allows the algorithms to understand the importance of these questions, and subscribing ensures you receive the subsequent parts of this exhaustive 9-part series as they are released. We are building a community of silent investigators dedicated to piercing the veil of history. Now let us continue our descent into the laboratory. The laboratory itself, according to the texts of Atrahasis and Enuma Elish, was a highly specialized setting, often referred to as the House of Life. This was the domain of the chief scientist Enki and the mother goddess and chief medical officer Ninhursag, or Ninti, Lady of Life. Their collaboration, described in meticulous, step-by-step detail, reads chillingly like a modern genetic engineering project. We see the clear scientific protocol, the capture of the appropriate primitive terrestrial template, the purification of the Anunnaki essence, the seed of their higher intelligence, and the meticulous process of mixing and incubating. The tablets explicitly mention repeated failures, the creation of prototypes that were defective, beings with impaired vision, stunted limbs, or cognitive disjunctions. Why mention failed prototypes if the process was purely magical or divine? It confirms that the creators were engaged in an empirical, iterative process of trial and error, a hallmark of scientific development, not mystical decree. This struggle toward perfection was centered on embedding a crucial element: the signal. What exactly did the Anunnaki inject into the human blueprint? It was not just opposable thumbs or the capacity for rudimentary tool use. Those were already evolving traits. What was transferred was the complex, abstractive consciousness, the capacity for philosophical thought, mathematical reasoning, and, critically, the ability to transmit complex linguistic information across generations. This signal provided the foundation for rapid cultural transmission, the very definition of civilization. It was the key that unlocked the dormant potential in the terrestrial DNA, a sudden, powerful ignition switch thrown by an external intelligence. The unsettling truth, the core uneasiness of this revelation, lies in the purpose behind this sophisticated genetic manipulation. The Anunnaki did not grant us consciousness as a gift of peer recognition. They engineered us to be specialized instruments of labor, beings intelligent enough to follow complex instructions, yet programmed with inherent limitations and a predisposition toward obedience. The contract was simple, though rapidly forgotten by the created. We gain intelligence, they gain workers. Our civilization was born out of servitude, built upon a debt owed to our creators, a debt perhaps still subconsciously coded into the fabric of our societal structures and our relentless, sometimes senseless pursuit of work. The relationship deepens in complexity when we examine the concept of the Anunnaki cycles. If these beings originated from the alleged 12th planet, Nibiru, whose orbital period is estimated to be approximately 3,600 Earth years, a shar, then their influence would not have been constant. Instead, it would have been cyclical, waxing and waning based on their proximity to Earth. This suggests that human history might not be a continuous, linear progression, but a series of distinct epochs, each punctuated by a period of close contact, a periodic check-in or update from the creators. Consider the historical periods of rapid cultural explosion, the sudden, unexplained rise of Sumer itself, the accelerated knowledge of the Egyptians, or the precise astronomical understanding of the Olmecs, all seemingly emerging almost fully formed. Were these cultural leaps merely coincidences, or were they synchronized events coinciding with the perihelion passage of Nibiru, when the observers returned, delivering a fresh burst of information, perhaps even subtle genetic tweaks, to their primary investment? The thought is chilling, that we might be living, evolving, and suffering within a carefully managed greenhouse experiment, subject to periodic reviews by those who possess the orbital keys to our cultural progression. And if the Anunnaki were here, who else was watching? The Sumerian texts, while focused primarily on the rivalry between Enlil and Enki, occasionally hint at a broader galactic context. There is mention of the Igigi, the lower-ranking Anunnaki who remained primarily in Earth orbit, serving as a transitional buffer. But what about the silent partners? Or perhaps, the silent opponents? The implication that Earth was merely a resource extraction point suggests that the Anunnaki operation might have been viewed as a violation of cosmic protocol by others. Did the Anunnaki hasten our development to create a ready workforce before the arrival of a larger policing presence? Or were they the initial wave of a colonization effort that ultimately failed, leaving us, the hybrid workforce, as their unintended legacy? The ultimate question that brings us back to the origins of our DNA is redundancy. Why go through the effort of creating the Lulu Amelu when the Igigi were already functioning as workers? The answer lies in thermodynamics and adaptation. The Igigi were presumably ill-suited for the harsh manual labor beneath Earth's atmosphere for prolonged periods, or perhaps they were too valuable to risk in mining accidents. The new hybrid, the human, was perfectly engineered to endure the Earth's atmosphere, reproduce rapidly, and crucially, was expendable. We were the cold, calculated solution to a logistical problem, a living, self-replicating tool designed for geological resource extraction. This cold calculation, this absolute lack of sentimental attachment to the hybrid species, suggests a profound ethical gulf between creator and created. It is this gap, this missing genetic link that separates our rapid rise from the slow progression of our ancestors that now compels us to look directly into the double helix itself. We have explored the historical narrative, the language of the laboratory, and the cyclical nature of the Creator's visits. Now, the investigation must shift from the mythological scrolls to the biological markers. If the Anunnaki performed an intervention, if they spliced their essence into the clay, then that foreign, non-terrestrial signature must still reside within the core operating system of humanity. We must ask, where is the trace element? Where is the evidence of the 223 genes that appear to have been dropped into the human genome without any discernible evolutionary precedent? This is the fundamental scientific core of the argument, and it is here that the narratives of the ancient world meet the undeniable facts of molecular biology. We are not merely examining old stories. We are looking for the fingerprint of the engineer on the blueprint of life. If you have traveled this far with us, absorbing the weight and complexity of this narrative, you are more than a viewer. You are a fellow investigator. To continue this journey into the scientific substantiation of the Anunnaki theory, where we examine the specific genetic codes that defy Darwinian explanation, your continued attention is essential. If the exploration into the origins of our consciousness resonates deeply within you, please take a moment. Ensure you are subscribed. Signal your recognition by leaving a like, and tell us your thoughts on the purpose of the Lulu Amelu. Comment below using the phrase, "The clay remembers." This simple act helps us know who is genuinely committed to uncovering these truths. Do not look away now, for the deepest secrets of our biological heritage are waiting in the next part of our investigation, where the Sumerian tablets finally intersect with the genomic map. The laboratory door has just opened. What if the most profound mystery of our existence lies not in what we lack, but in what we were given too soon? We stand at the precipice of deep time, gazing backward at the almost unbelievable chasm between the early hominids, adapting slowly to the whims of the Pliocene and Pleistocene eras, and the sudden, explosive dawn of Homo sapiens. This is the strangeness we must confront, the biological echo that reverberates across 70,000 years of history. Standard evolutionary models posit a gradual accumulation of genetic advantages, a slow, arduous crawl toward complexity. Yet the archaeological record, when viewed through the unfiltered lens of the ancient Mesopotamian narratives, tells a story of immediate, targeted acceleration. It suggests a break in continuity, a moment of profound recognition when the raw, pliable clay of the indigenous hominid was deliberately mixed with the sophisticated, almost cosmic essence of the observers, the Anunnaki. The focus of our investigation now shifts decisively from the motives of these beings, which were centered on the relentless acquisition of resources, primarily gold, to the methodology of their biological engineering. The Sumerian texts, particularly the accounts concerning the creation of the Lulu Amelu, the primitive worker, are astonishingly precise in their description of genetic manipulation. They do not speak in metaphor about clay and water alone. They speak of the essence of a god mixed with the blood and tissue of the local earth dweller. This act, described with clinical detachment in texts like the Atrahasis epic, was not a natural mutation. It was the purpose of the primordial clay, a calculated fusion of two vastly different genetic lineages. This is where curiosity turns to disquiet. To accept this premise is to accept that the very foundation of our unique consciousness, our capacity for abstract thought, language, and spiritual yearning, is an inheritance, a silent code embedded within the double helix, rather than an achievement purely earned through natural selection. We are forced to ask, what exactly did they contribute? If the goal was simply physical labor, mining, digging, carrying, the existing hominids, arguably Homo erectus or early Neanderthals, could have been domesticated and utilized. They possessed the necessary strength and basic organization. But the Anunnaki required something more, something that transcended simple obedience. They needed creatures capable of sophisticated communication, capable of understanding complex instructions, and perhaps most importantly, capable of recognizing a kind of temporal authority. This points to the introduction of specific cognitive faculties that dramatically enhance the raw genetic structure. Think of the jump, from survival instinct to the construction of vast temple complexes, from rudimentary stone tools to complex metallurgy, all appearing on a timeline that defies terrestrial logic. This is the moment of recognition, the unsettling acknowledgement that the timeline of human evolution might have been edited by external forces. If these whispers disturb the comfortable linear narrative of human ascendancy, perhaps it is worth pausing to consider the weight of this implication. If you find yourself grappling with the sheer strangeness of the idea that our advanced intellect is a legacy rather than an inherent terrestrial trait, then you are engaging with the deep heart of this investigation. Please consider sharing your initial reaction in the comments below, perhaps using the phrase engineered essence, so we can gauge the collective intuition regarding this accelerated evolution. This journey demands careful, measured reflection, so if the content resonates with the need for deeper understanding, take a moment to signal that recognition by liking this video and subscribing to ensure you do not miss the subsequent parts of this profound excavation into the forgotten cycles of history. As we delve deeper into the narrative acts described in the ancient tablets, we find layers of increasing disquiet. The creation of the Lulu was an emergency measure, dictated by the unsustainable burden of labor placed upon the Igigi, the lower-tier Anunnaki workers. But the texts hint at a secondary, perhaps more subtle necessity. The infusion of the essence of a god, which we can interpret genetically as high-level complex DNA sequences, was perhaps required to ensure compatibility with the Anunnaki presence, and crucially, to guarantee that the new creation possessed a longevity that surpassed that of the local animal kingdom, though still significantly less than that of their creators. This inheritance wasn't just physical strength, it was an innate, if suppressed, spiritual and intellectual potential. This potential is the very shadow of the observational tower, the silent acknowledgement that the creators maintained a distance, watching their experiment unfold, perhaps anticipating its inevitable growth beyond mere servitude. The history of the Anunnaki on Earth is intrinsically linked to great cyclical catastrophes, notably the Great Flood. This introduces a chilling pattern, the repetition of the cyclical catastrophe. The ancient texts are less a record of random disasters and more a sophisticated calendar of recurring, predictable cosmic events, perhaps linked to the orbital cycles of their own home planet. If the Anunnaki were capable of such genetic mastery, they were certainly masters of celestial mechanics. They knew the flood was coming. This knowledge adds a layer of urgency to the creation myth. They needed the workers quickly, but they also needed them to survive the coming cataclysm, possibly to preserve a portion of the refined genetic code they had invested in. This suggests that the Lulu Amalu was not merely disposable labor, but a genetic lifeboat designed to traverse the temporal barrier of destruction and maintain the Anunnaki's terrestrial presence, ensuring their eventual return would not be to a desolate, unpopulated realm. This inherent survival mechanism forms the basis of the whispers of forgotten memory. Why do so many disparate global mythologies speak of a great deluge, of divine interference, and of a golden age followed by a dramatic fall? Could these pervasive stories be echoes of the original programming, vestigial memories carried forward through the DNA structure itself? The human genome, after all, is a historical archive. If large complex sequences were rapidly inserted, those sequences might carry metadata, an imprint of the conditions and the purpose of their creation. We are decoding the silent inheritance every time a new ancient text is translated, every time a new anomaly in the archaeological record is unearthed. The very structure of our civilization, the sudden move toward megalithic architecture and astronomical obsession shortly after the proposed timeline of the last intervention, seems to confirm that humanity awoke, not slowly, but suddenly, possessing knowledge that had no terrestrial progenitor. This abrupt realization of advanced capacity is the burden of accelerated evolution. We were granted the keys to higher consciousness without the maturity to handle the vehicle. The Anunnaki essentially skipped the ethical and social development necessary for such profound technological and intellectual power. This might explain the persistent dual nature of humanity, the ability to compose sublime music and simultaneously commit unspeakable violence, the drive to explore the cosmos, coexisting with the impulse toward self-destruction. We are living out the inherent tension within the hybrid code, part indigenous, adaptable Earth creature, part sophisticated, perhaps aggressive, extraterrestrial observer. This imbalance, this innate duality, is the greatest proof of an engineered past, a history where essential stages of maturation were bypassed for expediency. The implications of this silent inheritance extend into the future. If the Anunnaki engineered our origin for their utility, and if their history is one of cycles and return, then the question is not if they will return, but when and why. This brings us to the promise of the return signal. The ancient texts, while detailing the departure and the setting up of proxies, kings, priests, also hint at temporal markers for their re-engagement. These markers are often astronomical or geological, aligning with the same cyclical patterns that predicted the Great Flood. If we are indeed an unfinished experiment, a population seeded and maintained, then our advanced scientific and technological progress today might be acting as a beacon, an unintentional fulfillment of the criteria necessary to trigger their return. Perhaps the technological singularity we anticipate is merely the threshold established by the original engineers for monitoring the progress of their investment. This thought that our technological adolescence is merely a precursor to a grander external reevaluation should cause profound reflection. We are left with the pervasive feeling of the unfinished experiment. The Anunnaki departed, leaving behind a civilization designed for them, built by beings whose very DNA structure held the blueprint of their creators. The great cities, the complex mathematics, the early understanding of orbital mechanics, all these attributes served as a continuous homage, a mechanism to retain the memory until the observers deemed the time right for reassessment. The lingering genetic code within us might contain dormant sequences, ready to be activated when the celestial alignments confirm the cycle's completion. The deep echo of their presence is not just in the ancient cuneiform, it is woven into the fabric of our being, a temporal lock waiting for the correct cosmic key to turn. If you have followed this intricate tapestry of history and potential biology, recognizing the profound connections between the ancient stories and the anomalies in our evolutionary record, then you understand the depth of this investigation. If you have stayed with us through this dense exploration of acceleration, inheritance, and cycles, if the concept of an engineered essence resonates within your own sense of deep time, you are precisely the audience this inquiry is designed for. The commitment required to explore these sensitive topics is significant, and your continued presence confirms the gravity of this subject. To ensure this deep dive continues, and to help others find this critical information, we ask that you acknowledge this research. Please subscribe to the channel immediately to join this intellectual journey, and give this video a definitive like if the ideas presented provoke genuine thought. More importantly, let the universe know you are listening. Comment below with the specific phrase, "The experiment continues." We are about to move from the genesis of the genetic code to the exact nature of the Anunnaki's departure and the terrestrial proxies they left in place, the subject of our next crucial installment. Do not miss what comes next. The path to understanding our origin is often found not in the beginning, but in the calculated abandonment. The next part will appear on your screen now. What if the most profound silence in human history is not the absence of sound, but the deliberate absence of memory? We stand perpetually at the edge of a vast canyon of time, listening for an echo that we ourselves have been conditioned to ignore. The great structures of our understanding, history, anthropology, theology, are built upon ground that feels perpetually unstable, shifting subtly beneath the weight of uncomfortable evidence found etched onto brittle clay tablets. We have discussed the narrative of the Adamu, the primordial man, created in the Eden, not through divine fiat, but through a calculated, complex process involving genetic material and specialized beings, the Igigi. But the true unsettling revelation lies not merely in the fact of the creation, but in the subsequent, almost chilling, efficiency of the design itself, and the implications of what was left out of the final human blueprint. We must shift our perspective from the initial flash of creation to the long, lingering shadow it cast. If the Anunnaki were, as the texts imply, beings of immense lifespan, perhaps near immortality, what justified the decision to engineer a being, the Lulu or primitive worker, with such inherent limitations, specifically the drastically shortened lifespan and the restricted cognitive bandwidth? This is where curiosity turns into genuine estrangement. The Sumerian accounts, and their echoes in later Mesopotamian and even biblical texts, describe a moment where the seed was taken, mixed with the clay of earth, and then incubated within a goddess surrogate, Ninhursag. This hybridization was precise, but hybridization implies combining the best traits. Yet the resultant humanity suffered a profound reduction in temporal existence. Was the purpose of the experiment merely to create a servant capable of operating within Earth's environment, robust enough for the hard labor of gold mining, yet docile and short-lived enough never to challenge the masters? This technical restriction, detailed metaphorically in the ancient narrative, suggests a hidden protocol, a safeguard embedded directly into our biological heritage. We are left to grapple with the possibility that the very constraints we experience, the brevity of life, the struggle against decay, the rapid forgetting of ancestral knowledge, are not natural phenomena of evolution, but features of a deliberate genetic modification. It is the signature of the Creator inscribed upon the creature, a signature that reads, "Limited use only." The texts speak of the Anunnaki retreating, leaving the Lulu to proliferate, but always with the understanding that they remained the shepherd of the creation. This leads us immediately to the weight of the cycles. Our established historical timeline operates on a comfortable linear progression, yet the ancient wisdom consistently emphasizes cycles. Cycles of catastrophe, cycles of astronomical alignment, and perhaps most terrifyingly, cycles of knowledge and forgetting. Every few millennia, it seems, human civilization achieves a peak, only to be violently reset, leaving behind megalithic ruins and fragmented records that defy the narrative of linear development. This great forgetting is crucial. Was it merely a consequence of cosmic events, the floods and celestial realignments that plagued the ancient world? Or was the forgetting itself a managed event, a necessary purge to maintain the stability of the long-running experiment? If the Anunnaki periodically returned, or merely maintained surveillance from remote stations, the idea of them as constant observers gains traction. They are not merely absentee landlords, they are scientists monitoring a petri dish. This observer's paradox presents an ethical abyss. Did they stand by, watching civilizations rise and fall, knowing the inevitable trajectory of their genetically restricted creation, intervening only when the experiment risked total collapse, or when the resources they needed were endangered? The profound realization, the recognition that generates true intellectual unease, is that our limited lifespan serves not as a biological necessity, but as an essential inhibitor of dangerous long-term memory. If our consciousness could span multiple millennia, as theirs supposedly did, the patterns would become painfully clear, the truth undeniable. The cycles would connect, the creators would be revealed, and the established social order that benefits from our historical amnesia would crumble. The restriction of life is thus a tool for historical control. And if you find yourself reflecting deeply on this possibility, wondering how such a vast, unsettling idea could remain hidden in plain sight for so long, then you are beginning to participate in the real discovery. We need to measure the extent of this intellectual inertia. Pause for a moment and consider sharing your thoughts on which part of the ancient texts feels most deliberately obscured by mainstream interpretation. Your insights, when shared below, help map the collective understanding of this historical silence. Now let's continue to trace this hidden protocol within our very essence. The focus must now narrow onto the nature of the suppressed memory. We carry within us what might be called the starseed heritage, the residual echo of the advanced Anunnaki genetic input. While the Lulu was engineered for hard labor, the texts insist it was made in their image, not just physically, but with the capacity for higher thought, for language, for mathematical abstraction. This capacity, however, remains latent, often triggered by stress, revelation, or deep intellectual pursuit, leading to brief flashes of profound intuitive knowledge that seem entirely unwarranted by our terrestrial evolutionary timeline. It is this residual memory, this high-frequency genetic data, that the short lifespan is designed to neutralize before it can be fully activated and transmitted across generations effectively. The ancient libraries, the destroyed temples, the sudden shifts in knowledge during the Bronze Age collapse. These are not random cultural failures. They are moments where the fading signal nearly vanished entirely. The Anunnaki, or their terrestrial proxies, may have ensured that only fragmented clues remained, disguised within ritual, myth, and astronomy, turning technical data into inaccessible religious dogma. We find ourselves in an era of unprecedented access to information, yet we struggle to discern the difference between genuine ancient wisdom and the noise of modern interpretation. The signal is faint, encoded in the synchronization of planetary alignments and the precise measurements of structures like the Great Pyramid, which seem to speak a language of cosmic engineering far beyond the known capacities of the builders we are taught to accept. We ignore these signals at our peril, dismissing them as mere coincidence or primitive attempts at mathematics. This begs the central question of sovereignty. If the creation was initiated, why the prolonged withdrawal? This is the return constraint. The texts are ambiguous, suggesting both self-imposed isolation and perhaps a complex cosmic law governing intervention. Were the Anunnaki bound by a galactic non-interference directive after the initial genetic modification? Or did the Earth environment post-deluge become less suitable for their continued direct presence? Whatever the reason, their absence mandates our current intellectual dilemma. We are the inheritors of an incomplete project, possessing potential for greatness that remains tethered to a restrictive biological clock. We hold the inheritance of silence, the mandate to understand the fragments of truth left behind. The ancient texts are not just historical documents. They are a set of instructions, a warning, and perhaps a map for recovery. To dismiss the Anunnaki narrative as mere mythology is to willfully ignore the only plausible explanation for the sudden complex emergence of Sumerian civilization, a culture that seemed to begin fully formed, complete with laws, administration, cosmology, and a sophisticated understanding of cycles that span tens of thousands of years. The idea that their scientific knowledge was mistaken for divine miracle is the greatest historical deception, rendering us blind to the true nature of our origins. As we dissect these layered narratives, a pattern begins to emerge that suggests a profound temporal convergence. The ancient texts repeatedly emphasize a cyclical return, tied to specific astronomical markers and the duration of Nibiru's orbit. This brings us to the threshold of the impending shift. If these cycles dictate not only catastrophe but also the potential for renewed interaction, then understanding the mechanisms of our genetic limitation becomes paramount. We are no longer simply studying history. We are preparing for a potential future dictated by our very origins. The urgency of this investigation is magnified by the persistent, whispered theme of the ancient records, the need for humanity to be prepared to receive the signal of return, or risk being found wanting in the management of the experimental zone they were left to inhabit. The next crucial phase of our inquiry requires us to pivot from the philosophical evidence to the material evidence, examining the specific measurable traces left behind, the structures, the technology, and the undeniable mathematical echoes that serve as physical markers of this profound extraterrestrial involvement in the creation of human DNA. If you have stayed with this complex and deep investigation, you recognize that this is not casual viewing, but a profound commitment to understanding the roots of our existence. To continue peeling back the layers of historical amnesia, and to ensure you do not miss the crucial upcoming parts of this deep dive, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. Liking this video signals to others that this exploration is vital, helping this information reach those who are also asking these critical questions. Your engagement ensures the continuation of this research. The next part will delve into the architectural impossibilities and the specific astronomical knowledge encoded in the structures of lost civilizations, presenting the undeniable physical evidence that corroborates the genetic narrative found on the clay tablets. Therefore, before moving on, please confirm your intellectual commitment by commenting below with the phrase, "Protocol observed." And when the screen shifts, join us immediately for the next step, where the mythological becomes tangible and the Anunnaki's presence is measured in stone and starlight. What if the most profound chapters of our origin story are not hidden in the fossil record, but are instead etched onto the clay tablets of forgotten civilizations, whispering of a deliberate, calculated intervention? We have examined the Sumerian accounts, the primary source detailing the descent of the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, and their monumental project on earth, the procurement of gold. But the true enigma, the silent scream echoing through millennia, lies not in the gold, but in the rapid, almost inexplicable emergence of Homo sapiens itself. Evolution, as we currently understand it, suggests a sprawling, meandering path, a slow accretion of genetic advantage. Yet the archaeological data presents us with a strange anomaly, an epochal shift where cognitive capacities seem to surge ahead of the expected biological timeline, as if a vital segment of code was simply copied and pasted from a far more advanced operating system. This is the conceptual threshold we must now cross, moving past the simple acceptance of the Anunnaki's presence to understanding the meticulous mechanism of their genetic engineering and what that implies for the deep structure of our own consciousness. The ancient texts, particularly the fragmented narratives surrounding Enki, the master scientist and engineer among the Anunnaki, do not describe evolution. They describe manufacture. They speak of mixing the essence of the primitive workers, the existing hominids of Earth, with the Tiamat's blood, a metaphor often interpreted as the highly refined and complex DNA of the Anunnaki themselves. This admixture, described as taking place in a biological house of destiny, was not a mere refinement, but a fundamental overhaul. If our DNA is a language, the Anunnaki, according to these records, introduced entirely new phonemes, grammatical structures that allowed for abstract thought, complex language, and crucially, the capacity for worship and subservience. This brings a chilling sense of estrangement, forcing us to ask, were the sudden bursts of artistic creativity, the swift mastery of fire, and the development of agriculture not inherent human achievements, but rather the delayed activation of pre-programmed capabilities, waiting for the right environmental trigger or the opportune celestial alignment? The recognition of this potential design element throws into profound relief the conventional narrative of human ascendancy, suggesting we are not merely the beneficiaries of random mutation, but the heirs of an intricate and perhaps rushed genetic experiment. This uneasy recognition deepens when we consider the described process of modification. The texts suggest that the initial attempts at creating the Lulu Amelu, the mixed worker, resulted in failures, beings incapable of reproduction or possessing strange physical deformities. This trial and error process speaks to the challenges of merging two vastly different genetic blueprints, and ultimately highlights the very specific objective: creating a being capable of sustaining the reproductive cycle, while simultaneously maintaining a suitable lifespan, long enough for effective labor, short enough to prevent rebellion and competitive longevity with the creators. This meticulous balancing act implies not just technical skill, but a moral quandary for the creators. They bestowed the spark of divinity, the ability to reason and choose, but confined it within a deliberately fragile shell. If these ancient stories hold the keys to understanding our biological origins, then we must confront the uncomfortable possibility that certain aspects of our genetic makeup, our inherent susceptibility to disease, our shortened lifespan relative to other primates, and our deep-seated yearning for something more, are not defects of nature, but rather features of the original imperfect design. To fully grasp the magnitude of this alleged biological intervention, we must look beyond the creation event itself and consider its lasting impact on the collective human psyche. The stories of the Anunnaki imply that their greatest gift, and perhaps their greatest curse upon us, was the insertion of an inherent memory, a spectral shadow of their own world, Nibiru, often referred to as the planet of crossing. This subliminal memory manifests not as concrete historical knowledge, but as an overwhelming sense of displacement, an existential longing for a paradise we have never physically known. If you find yourself deeply moved by these ancient accounts, if the concept of observers and cycles of return resonates not just intellectually but on an almost cellular level, then you are engaging with the deep echo of this narrative. It is in this shared intellectual excavation that the true power of these texts lies, demanding a psychological commitment to the mystery. Perhaps you have encountered similar historical puzzles that defy conventional explanation. If so, share your keyword or phrase in the comments below, extending this investigation into the collective mind. And if this journey into the profound origins of our own species is compelling, consider subscribing and hitting the like button, ensuring we continue to explore these sensitive threads of history together. This connection to the creators, this deep-seated human yearning for the stars and for the wisdom of the elders, transforms the Anunnaki from mere mythological figures into the ultimate watchers. Their burden, as described in later texts, was not just managing the mining operation, but grappling with the ethical consequences of accelerating an entire species. After the initial period of intense labor, and especially following the devastating Great Flood, the dynamic changed. The texts describe a gradual withdrawal, a retreat into the shadows, leaving behind systems of governance and priesthoods designed to maintain the integrity of the original program. The Anunnaki became the distant divine progenitors, observed through astronomical movements and celestial signals, a pattern of stewardship that involved monitoring the genetic yield from afar. The concept of the missing link in mythology emerges precisely here. Why do virtually all major world mythologies, from Sumer to the Mesoamerican cultures, speak of a golden age, a period of interaction with sky dwellers, followed by a dramatic decline and subsequent abandonment? If evolution were linear and self-contained, this uniformity of global myth should not exist. Instead, the universality of the creation story, involving dust, divine breath, and often a deliberate shortening of life, serves as recognition of the intervention. It is the cultural memory of the genetic modification, a silent pact recorded not on clay but passed down through ritual and oral tradition. The fact that the early human civilizations achieved complex societal structures almost instantaneously after the supposed modification suggests that the Anunnaki did not just provide the biological substrate, but also the initial blueprint for civil society. The laws, the understanding of complex mathematics, and the astronomical knowledge necessary to track their own cyclical return. The focus must now turn to the mechanisms of knowledge transfer and preservation. According to certain interpretations of the cuneiform tablets, particularly those surrounding the figure of Ziusudra, the Sumerian Noah, not all knowledge was lost during the deluge. The texts hint at a hidden library, not necessarily physical books, but complex crystalline matrices, or perhaps specific individuals entrusted with preserving the me, the divine decrees or cultural templates that governed every aspect of civilized life, from weaving to kingship. These me represented the essential software package installed by the Anunnaki. It is through the meticulous study of these surviving texts that we find oblique references to the precise composition of human biology, knowledge far exceeding what an emerging Bronze Age civilization should possess. These records describe processes that sound eerily similar to genetic recombination and cloning, methods that explain the sudden proliferation of the modern human with distinct shared characteristics. As we delve deeper into this narrative, the unsettling truth of the resonance of Nibiru becomes unavoidable. The Anunnaki arrived on Earth, according to the texts, when their home planet, Nibiru, approached its perihelion, the point closest to the Sun, a highly energetic and disruptive moment in the solar system. Their returns are tied to these massive orbital cycles, which in turn correlate with periods of cataclysm on Earth, the ice ages, the deluge, and possibly other smaller-scale societal collapses. If we are the engineered result of an intervention timed to celestial mechanics, then our own inherent instabilities, our cycles of self-destruction and rapid rebuilding, might be tied not merely to human error, but to a powerful, distant gravitational influence that acts as a cosmic timer. This deepens the sense of uneasiness. If the conditions that brought them here are cyclical, then the conditions for their return are also predictable. This brings us to the signature of the alien architect. the most compelling yet subtle piece of evidence drawn from the texts. The Anunnaki are described as possessing extreme longevity, capabilities of traversing space, and powers of telepathy and advanced understanding of natural laws. The humans they created, however, possessed a finite lifespan, a reliance on physical language, and an inherent drive to explore but rarely to fully understand their creator's complex mathematics. This differential is the signature. It is the mark of the limitation purposefully placed upon the engineered race. The capacity for consciousness was granted, but the key to limitless power was withheld. The texts subtly suggest that certain junk DNA segments, dismissed by modern science as non-functional, might in fact be the dormant archives, the genetic time capsules left by the architects, waiting for the precise alignment or the specific energetic frequency to awaken. We are left standing on the precipice of the impending signal. If the ancient texts accurately reflect a history of genetic intervention driven by cyclical cosmic necessity, then our focus should shift from merely debating the history to actively monitoring the future. The narrative arc, which begins with creation and proceeds through stewardship and withdrawal, seems to imply a culmination, a moment when the architects return to assess the success or failure of their creation, perhaps coinciding with the next major celestial crossing. This is not about predicting a doomsday. It is about recognizing a pattern so vast, so fundamental to human civilization, that it spans epochs. The very essence of human curiosity, the relentless search for meaning beyond the mundane, may be the most persistent evidence of the Anunnaki's influence, a programmed dissatisfaction designed to lead us, eventually, back to the source of our own creation. If you stayed with this intense and complex investigation into the fundamental origins of our DNA, you are one of the few truly willing to question the accepted historical framework. To become a permanent part of this continuous exploration, ensure you subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Tell us in the comments below what single word best describes the feeling this history evokes in you. Perhaps resonance, eternity, or curiosity. Your participation fuels the continuation of this search. The next part of this deep dive will focus on the esoteric knowledge allegedly left behind by the Anunnaki and the specific prophecies concerning the return of the Watchers, a segment that will dramatically deepen our understanding of what the ancient texts define as human destiny. The thread of our genetic tapestry is long and complex, and the needle is still moving. Join us next time as we follow that thread further into the labyrinth of our own forgotten history. Was the greatest moment of human evolution not an accident of nature, but a deliberate omission in the historical record? We are confronted by a silence in the deep past, a sudden vacuum where gradual change should reside, an intellectual chasm separating our earliest ancestors from the Homo sapiens, who suddenly possessed the capacity for complex language, sophisticated tool-making, and abstract thought. The timeline, according to conventional science, is a series of fits and starts, but the leap that created us, the modern human, remains startlingly abrupt, almost miraculous. If we accept the premise woven into the fabric of Sumerian clay, the answer to this rupture lies not on Earth, but in the arrival of the Anunnaki and their urgent need for labor, a need that forced a collision between highly advanced extraterrestrial biology and the nascent hominid genome. The narrative we have been tracking suggests an active intervention, a genetic splicing operation performed in a primordial lab, a celestial forge where the fate of terrestrial life was irrevocably altered. But the true mystery is not simply that the splicing occurred, but the nature of the material they chose to leave behind. Why does the human genome contain segments that appear utterly redundant, archaic, or perhaps more accurately, dormant? We often refer to these vast stretches of non-coding material as junk DNA. Yet in the precise, utilitarian logic described in the accounts of Enki and Ninmah, the concept of leaving waste or error seems profoundly antithetical to their technological prowess. If they were capable of creating the Lulu, the composite worker, with such specificity, surely every single base pair was intended for a purpose, even if that purpose remains hidden, waiting patiently for a signal or a trigger that is yet to arrive. This persistence of the anomalous code, the silent blueprint lying within the nucleus of every human cell, is the greatest clue we possess regarding our non-linear origin. It suggests that the modification was not merely functional, designed only to lift heavy burdens in the minds of the Abzu, but informational, a sophisticated genetic time capsule embedded within the very essence of what we call human. If these ancient texts speak of cycles, of great cosmic rhythms that govern the periodic return of Nibiru and its inhabitants, then perhaps our own genetic programming is tethered to that same inescapable periodicity. The strangeness intensifies when we consider the echoes of the cycle, the historical pattern of advanced civilizations suddenly appearing, flourishing brilliantly, and then collapsing into collective amnesia, often coinciding with astronomical markers or major cataclysmic events. Was the genetic modification intended to last indefinitely, or was it calibrated to function only during specific windows of cosmic alignment, during the return? The texts hint at a sense of temporary stewardship, suggesting that the Anunnaki viewed their creation as a functional asset tied to their mission on Earth. If that mission was cyclical, our very design might incorporate an evolutionary timer, a scheduled moment when the genetic governors, those subtle limitations placed upon our lifespan and cognitive reach, might automatically disengage, or conversely, when the creators might return to inspect their handiwork, utilizing the embedded observer's imprint. Imagine for a moment that what we label as junk DNA is in fact a sophisticated genetic surveillance or storage mechanism. The recognition dawns that the Anunnaki, masters of bioengineering, would not simply abandon their project. They required data. They required an insurance policy. The structure of our inner biological code therefore becomes not merely a historical record of terrestrial adaptation, but a continuously running log, potentially broadcasting subtle signals or awaiting specific external frequencies to unlock its higher processing power. This possibility generates a profound sense of unease. We have spent millennia exploring our spiritual and intellectual capacity, searching for meaning in the vastness, all while the greatest technological blueprint, the half-forgotten blueprint of our true potential, lies dormant, locked behind a forgotten password left by beings who engineered limitations into our existence for the sake of control and hierarchy. We are essentially living within a factory default setting, never having accessed the full operational system. If the sheer weight of these implications compels you to look deeper into the shadows of history and science, if the recognition of this potential genetic surveillance resonates with your own intuition about human limits, then perhaps this journey requires shared insight. This is not passive viewing, it is an active decoding. I invite you to pause for a moment to signal your presence and participation in this discovery. Engaging with this information, leaving a like or commenting, helps this narrative find other minds ready to contemplate the profound realization that our limitations might be artificial, a deliberate restriction placed upon us during the time of the celestial creation. Moving deeper into the texts, we confront the apparent contradiction presented by Enki. He is often portrayed as the empathetic creator, the one who warned humanity of the imminent flood, the keeper of records who ensured our survival. Yet, he was also the primary bioengineer, the architect of the limitations. Was this benevolence or pragmatic scientific necessity? The gradual revelation suggests that Enki's actions were driven by a complex mix of professional curiosity and a deep dissatisfaction with his brother Enlil's harsh, authoritative rule. The genetic upgrade he may have subtly introduced, the ability to reproduce without requiring constant intervention from the Anunnaki, the very trait that saved us from extinction, was perhaps his silent act of defiance, a way to ensure the continuity of his experimental creation, the Lulu, even if it meant risking the wrath of the Council. This brings us back to the Celestial Forge. When the ancient Mesopotamians wrote of gods mixing essence, clay, and blood, we must translate this mythological language into the only idiom that makes sense in the context of advanced spacefaring civilization: molecular biology and biotechnology. The clay represents the foundational terrestrial matter, the hominid ovum. The essence is the highly refined genetic material of the Anunnaki, and the blood is the means of integration, the necessary component for combining different life forms into a stable hybrid. The tablets detail precise procedures, specific locations, and the roles of designated scientists, the birth goddesses like Ninmah. This was not magic. This was the science of genetic manipulation on a monumental scale, suggesting a deep established understanding of the helix structure millennia before its terrestrial discovery. The most chilling aspect of this engineering, however, is the calibration of consciousness. Why impose limitations on the lifespan, the rapid decay of the physical body, and the relatively narrow band of sensory perception? The answer, according to the dynamics of the ancient celestial hierarchy, is control. An immortal, fully conscious, and genetically empowered, Lulu would quickly recognize its state of servitude and pose an existential threat to its masters. Thus, the modification was designed to manage labor output while simultaneously ensuring intellectual containment. Our current human existence, characterized by fleeting years and a persistent struggle to understand the nature of reality, may be the direct result of a calculated genetic decision made by our creators to ensure obedience and minimize revolutionary thought. Yet, evidence of the full blueprint surfaces occasionally. Consider the signature in the stone and the helix. Ancient architecture found globally, the precise cyclopean masonry of structures that seemingly defy the capabilities of the supposed builders, mirrors the incomprehensible precision required to rearrange the human genome. Both are signatures of a technology far exceeding the scope of the local civilization. Could the construction techniques, the geometric knowledge, and the sudden emergence of sophisticated language, the Sumerian cuneiform itself, all be tertiary effects, echoes of the original infusion of advanced knowledge that occurred alongside the genetic modification? It's as if the tools for basic survival were granted, but the master key to the archive was deliberately withheld. But the cycles dictate movement. If the Anunnaki were bound by the 3,600-year orbit of Nibiru, and if their mission included periodic reassessment of their biological asset, then we must consider the decoding of the waiting signal. Throughout history, great minds, philosophers, mystics, scientists, have spoken of latent human abilities, of psychic capacity and untapped brain potential. What if these sporadic powerful insights are not individual anomalies but momentary accidental activations of the dormant code, flickers of the original uncalibrated Anunnaki genetic input reacting to environmental stimuli or subtle cosmic shifts? The narrative suggests that as the celestial body approaches, certain energies change, perhaps unlocking the genetic shackles imposed upon us, preparing the vessel for a new phase of interaction or intervention. The great question that must carry us forward, therefore, is not if we are genetically modified, but what happens next. We are standing at the threshold of a new scientific and historical recognition, forced to confront the potential that our entire evolutionary path was externally programmed. We must begin preparing the vessel for the unforeseen inheritance, the monumental shift that awaits if the ancient cycles prove true. If the return is imminent, will our dormant genes recognize the signal? Will the limitations we have lived under for millennia suddenly fall away, revealing a version of humanity far more advanced, far more terrifyingly complex than we currently dare to imagine? If you have stayed with us through this deep dive into the coded history of our species, through the whispers of the clay tablets and the complex structure of our own DNA, you recognize that this is not just history. This is prophecy, disguised as archaeology. This pursuit requires a focused commitment, a willingness to see the uncomfortable truth embedded in the scientific and mythological records. To ensure you do not miss the final conclusive parts of this journey, where we will examine the direct implications of the genetic inheritance, I urge you to become part of this investigative team. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, signal your engagement with a like, and share your deepest thought about this possibility by commenting the phrase, "Awaken the Sleeper." Join us next time as we confront the ultimate question: what are the consequences of meeting our creators, and how will humanity manage the activation of the ancient code? The greatest chapters of human history may still be ahead of us, locked within our own biological architecture. Is the most profound mystery of human existence not how we evolved, but why we evolved so rapidly? We have spent countless hours tracing the archaeological footsteps of our ancestors, mapping the glacial retreat, and dating the fragments of stone tools. Yet, even after all this meticulous effort, a vast chasm remains, a dizzying, terrifying gap between the slow, grinding inertia of natural selection and the sudden, explosive dawn of cognitive modernity. The ancient texts, particularly those etched into the clay tablets of Mesopotamia, do not merely offer an alternative origin story. They suggest an explanation for this historical displacement, a reason why we feel intrinsically like a project that was accelerated beyond its natural pace. This estrangement, this faint ancestral memory of a timeline that doesn't quite fit the geology, is the quiet vibration underlying all myth and all spiritual seeking. It leads us back, inevitably, to the figures of the Anunnaki, the architects of this genetic anomaly, and the fundamental question: if they built us for a purpose, did they leave behind a signature, a hidden mechanism designed for their ultimate return? The recognition dawns slowly, not as a thunderclap of irrefutable proof, but as a confluence of data points that become impossible to ignore. If we accept, even hypothetically, the narrative of Enki and Ninmah collaborating in a sophisticated laboratory, the House of Shaping, to merge their advanced genetic material with that of the indigenous hominid, the implication is staggering. This was not a random mutation. It was genetic engineering executed by beings who understood the deep structure of the cosmic code. The immediate necessary consequence of such an intervention is that the resultant species, Homo sapiens, would carry a duality: the robust, ancient adaptability of the terrestrial ape, overlaid with the fragile, highly advanced, and potentially proprietary code of the off-world constructors. We carry the memory of the Earth and the ambition of the stars, fused imperfectly within the double helix. This recognition quickly leads to profound disquiet. If the initial modification was designed to create a primitive worker capable of understanding instructions and reproducing, why the sudden introduction of profound consciousness, abstract thought, and, eventually, a self-destructive urge toward existential inquiry? The texts hint at a later refinement, perhaps unauthorized or necessitated by the Anunnaki's evolving needs on Earth, where the genetic dumbing down was incomplete, or perhaps later revoked by an individual like Enki, sympathetic to his creation. What if the part of us that suffers from existential dread, the part that seeks meaning beyond mere survival, is not a byproduct of evolution, but the intended yet inconvenient inheritance of the Anunnaki's own intellectual legacy? A highly compressed, high-functioning piece of software installed into hardware that was meant to be purely utilitarian. This is where the concept of planned obsolescence enters the narrative of human origins. Did the Anunnaki, concerned about a competing, rapidly reproducing species, install inherent limitations? Our relatively short lifespan compared to the vast epochs described in their own myths, our restricted access to higher cognitive functions, and the widespread genetic material, often dismissed as junk DNA. Could these be the regulatory switches, the deliberate limitations placed upon the Lulu Amalu, the mixed man? This inherent biological constraint becomes a subtle psychological burden, a persistent feeling that something is missing, that we are operating at a fraction of our intended capacity. If this idea of a controlled genesis resonates, if the profound, unsettling sensation that we are somehow incomplete echoes within you, pause and reflect on this vast historical stage we inhabit. Consider sharing your thoughts in the comments below, perhaps using the phrase, "the Anunnaki blueprint," to mark your place in this ongoing investigation. This interaction deepens our collective understanding and helps guide the exploration into these often silenced histories. And if this journey into the depths of ancient knowledge and speculative science has captured your attention, liking this video and subscribing ensures you remain connected as we unlock the final segments of this complex puzzle. The gradual revelation concerning the ultimate purpose of this genetic tailoring connects directly to the ancient idea of the return cycle. The Anunnaki departed, the texts inform us, but they left behind warnings and, more importantly, promises of their eventual return, often linked to the orbital cycle of their home planet, Nibiru. If they intend to return, what would they expect to find? A random self-determined civilization, or a carefully cultivated species ready to respond to a specific frequency? This leads us to the deeply uncomfortable notion that our junk DNA is not junk at all, but rather the genetic equivalent of a hardwired receiver. It is the sealed chamber of our inheritance, containing latent abilities, forgotten memories of the initial shaping, and most crucially, a biological key that will only turn when the external signal, the precise cosmic alignment or technological frequency, is broadcast. We begin to contemplate the existence of the sleepers. These are not mythical figures resting in caverns, but ancient encoded memories residing within the cellular structure of every human being. The genetic modification, according to this radical interpretation of the Sumerian accounts, did not just create a worker, it created a living biological archive. The forgetting, the historical amnesia about our true origins and the vast knowledge possessed by the earliest civilizations, was a necessary byproduct of the departure, a way to keep the experimental species docile and focused on rudimentary tasks. But the memory, the capability for higher cosmic awareness and psychic function, was not erased. It was merely suppressed, waiting for the celestial clock to signal the time of reactivation. If we follow this line of inquiry, we must confront the implications of our modern afflictions. Why the epidemic of anxiety, the widespread feeling of disconnection, the perpetual state of searching for something undefined? Could this collective unrest be the result of the sleepers stirring slightly, sensing the approach of the predicted return cycle, causing a subtle, agonizing dissonance between our mundane, material reality and the awakening of a profound, latent memory of stellar origins? The narratives surrounding this potential genetic awakening are often intertwined with the mysterious figures referred to as the Watchers. These entities, mentioned in various apocryphal and mainstream texts, sometimes depicted as fallen angels or minor Anunnaki who remained behind, serve as the persistent monitors. If the original experiment was successful, it required constant supervision to ensure the species did not deviate too far from the initial design parameters, nor destroy itself prematurely. The ancient descriptions of gods interacting with human rulers, guiding technological advances, and occasionally intervening in history may not be mythology at all, but accurate historical records of active project management. The implication is unsettling. Are we even now under continuous observation, not by benevolent cosmic beings, but by genetic custodians ensuring the integrity of their ancient asset? This brings us to the impending collision of timelines, a conceptual focal point that heightens the sense of urgency found in the Sumerian prophecies. If the return of Nibiru is indeed tied to the cyclic activation of the human genetic code, we may be approaching a period of profound biological transformation, whether we are ready for it or not. The rising global fascination with spirituality, altered states of consciousness, and esoteric knowledge could be interpreted not as mere cultural trends, but as a species-wide, instinctive preparation for the signal. The dormant code may already be receiving preliminary pulses, causing mass shifts in perception and an accelerated push for technological and metaphysical integration. The final, deeply unnerving question is this: when the Anunnaki return, will they recognize us, or will they deem the experiment corrupted? Will our current state, our conflicts, our environmental destruction, our fragmented understanding of reality, be seen as a failure of the initial design, necessitating a catastrophic reboot? Or will they see a species that, despite the restrictions placed upon it, has managed to retain and even reawaken its potential? Our very destiny might hinge on the Yao, genetic integrity established millennia ago. We stand at the precipice of a full comprehension of our past, only to realize that past is directly dictating our unavoidable future. The true revelation is that the key to transcending our current limits does not lie in discovering new external technologies, but in accessing the ancient, Anunnaki-engineered technology that lies dormant within our very cells. This intricate tapestry of ancient prophecy and speculative genetics requires focused attention, the kind of quiet dedication only those truly invested in uncovering the hidden architecture of reality can muster. If you have traversed this complex and often uncomfortable landscape of speculation with us, if you feel the pull of this suppressed knowledge, know that you are part of a growing community dedicated to illuminating the darkest corners of human history. To those who have remained engaged throughout this intense deliberation, if you have reached this critical juncture and wish to accompany us into the final stages of this investigation, I invite you to subscribe now to ensure you do not miss the concluding revelations. Please like this video to help ensure this discussion continues to reach others seeking clarity amid the historical noise, and leave a comment below using the specific phrase, "The return signal is near," to signify your deep engagement with the material. Our next segment is the culmination of this journey, where we will attempt to synthesize the fragmented evidence into a cohesive narrative of choice, destiny, and the ultimate test of human sovereignty. The ancient texts have led us to the threshold. Now we must prepare to cross it. Does the tapestry of human history, so meticulously woven by archaeologists and historians, contain a thread that perpetually refuses to fit the pattern? We have journeyed through the labyrinthine corridors of ancient Mesopotamia, seeking the shadows of the Anunnaki, those beings described as having descended from the heavens. We've parsed the clay tablets, studied the seemingly impossible speed of Sumerian civilization, and confronted the unnerving possibility that the very blueprint of our existence, the helix of our DNA, bears the indelible signature of an external, highly advanced intelligence. This is not merely an academic exercise in mythology. It is an investigation into the foundational premises of what it means to be human. If the texts are read literally, as historical records disguised as mythology, then the most profound realization awaiting us is not that we were created, but that we were engineered for a specific purpose, a design constraint that still echoes in our restless, short-lived, yet astonishingly creative existence. The ultimate conclusion, if we accept the narrative of the ancient scribes, is overwhelming. We are not the primary architects of our own biological destiny. We are the legacy project. This final act of understanding requires us to step away from the immediate focus on the gold mining operations and the urgency of their labor shortage, and instead look at the long-term implications of that initial genetic alteration. Why the deliberate choice to create a lesser version of themselves, the Lulu Amalu? The answer seems to lie in the 22nd pair of chromosomes, the missing fusion, the anomalous breakpoint that distinguishes us from every primate cousin we share 98% of our DNA with. It is the architectural scar, the point where the raw material of Earth life was spliced with the sophisticated code of the Anunnaki. This realization generates a deep, existential unease, a strange sense of recognition. We instinctively feel that there is something missing, a potential just beyond our reach, a knowledge or longevity that was excised from our biological heritage during that crucial initial modification. This feeling, this strange homesickness for a state of being we never directly experienced, might be the subconscious memory of the Anunnaki essence within us, forever seeking its complete form. We are left with the profound task of discerning which portions of this narrative are mere allegories and which are literal descriptions of biological events. The persistent accounts of Enki and Ninmah utilizing an atom, a specimen, and mixing the essence of life in a pit of creation, a laboratory perhaps, are too precise, too clinical, to dismiss purely as metaphorical poetry about gods playing in the mud. They describe a deliberate process of selection, manipulation, and implantation. They speak not of divine creation through pure will, but of laborious scientific iteration, a crucible of creation, filled with failures before the successful prototype, Adamu, was finally stabilized. This continuity of narrative across multiple independent ancient cultures, from Sumer to the Andean mountains, suggests a shared historical source, a global event witnessed and recorded, even if later filtered through the lens of local religious interpretation. To truly grasp the gravity of this heretical hypothesis, we must continue to explore the textual evidence, seeking the subtle clues that the ancient observers, the human scribes trained by the Anunnaki themselves, were careful to leave behind. If these deep reflections resonate with the unsettling questions you carry about our origins, please consider extending this conversation by leaving a thoughtful comment below, subscribing to ensure you do not miss the ongoing exploration of hidden histories, and liking this video to help guide others toward this essential dialogue about our genetic inheritance. The next pivotal question is the nature of the chroniclers themselves. Why did the Anunnaki, beings of immense power and technical skill, choose to document their operations with such painstaking detail? Were these tablets merely internal reports, an accounting of resources and processes, or did they serve a higher, predictive purpose? Perhaps the record was not intended for human interpretation at all, but as a map or a reference guide for those who would return. Imagine a species operating on cosmological timescales, where one human epoch is equivalent to a short break for them. They left a library, not for the benefit of the laborers, but for the ease of the next supervisory shift. The existence of these detailed records, surviving millennia of floods, wars, and cultural collapse, feels less like random chance and more like a deliberate planting of seeds. Historical markers meant to survive the great cycles of destruction. These cycles, in fact, form the terrifying backdrop to the entire Anunnaki saga. We must move beyond the static image of a single arrival and departure. The ancient texts, particularly those concerning the planet Nibiru, detail an orbit of approximately 3,600 terrestrial years. If this astronomical description is correct, then the history of humanity has not been one continuous, linear ascent, but a series of punctuated equilibria, regulated by the periodic proximity of our supposed creators. The great floods, the sudden collapse of civilizations, the reset buttons pressed throughout history. These events coincide suspiciously well with the predicted cycles of celestial proximity. The conclusion is chilling. The Anunnaki may not have merely visited, they may be seasonal landlords, returning periodically to inspect their property and their progeny. This brings us to the most intimate and disturbing possibility, the concept of sleeper genes. If we are a genetically modified organism, designed with specific limitations, our short lifespan, our limited sensory perception, is it not plausible that the modifying entity also included safeguards, or conversely, unlock mechanisms? The Anunnaki DNA fragments within us, those sophisticated sequences that govern our higher cognition, might be dormant, awaiting a specific trigger. This trigger could be environmental, a change in Earth's electromagnetic field as Nibiru approaches, or it could be engineered, a specific frequency or chemical introduced externally. The current obsession with evolutionary biology suddenly takes on a new context. Are we unknowingly evolving towards the completion of their original design? Or are we being monitored for signs of deviation from the intended script? Comment below with the phrase sleeper genes if this idea strikes you as the most plausible explanation for the gaps in our evolution. The mechanism of control extends beyond genetic programming. It involves the deliberate orchestration of what we call the Great Amnesia. Every time the Anunnaki departed, whether due to orbital necessity or internal conflict, a massive effort seems to have been made to erase the physical evidence of their presence. The destruction was often attributed to natural disasters, but the consistent reports of advanced technology being removed, structures being buried or dissolved, and specific knowledge being sequestered by the priesthoods suggest a management of human memory. It was crucial for the long-term success of the experiment that the laborers, once left to their own devices, forget the true nature of their origin. They needed to transition from knowing they were created slaves to believing they were freely willed creatures of God. This systematic forgetting ensured that upon the Creator's return, humanity would still be malleable, still operating within the defined parameters, unaware that the gods they worshipped were, in fact, their engineers. Yet are they truly absent during these long cycles? The ancient texts hint at watchers, or igigi, intermediate classes of Anunnaki or their direct servants, who may have remained on Earth or in the immediate solar system, observing, cataloging, and subtly guiding human development. The concept of the silent observation suggests that we are perpetually under surveillance. Our technological advancements, our global conflicts, our moral progression, all our metrics being collected and analyzed. This observation is not necessarily hostile. It is simply scientific monitoring. We are a petri dish observed from a hidden vantage point. Our belief systems, our societal structures, even our scientific paradigms, might be subtly influenced to ensure that the human species does not stumble upon the critical knowledge of its own modification prematurely before the next scheduled engagement. The ultimate inheritance of the Anunnaki intervention is a complex paradox. On one hand, we received the seeds of civilization, astronomy, mathematics, writing, monumental architecture, and a sophisticated legal code, gifts that accelerated us past the normal evolutionary pace of the planet. On the other hand, we inherited an internal conflict, a biological instability characterized by aggression, short life cycles, and a perpetual existential striving. We gained intelligence, but perhaps lost peace. We gained creation, but lost autonomy. The knowledge we now possess, gleaned from the very tablets they left behind, reveals that the gift of fire came with a chain, a genetic tether that binds our future to their cycles. We are the orphans of the stars, inheriting both the splendor and the tragedy of their initial, desperate intervention. As this exhaustive investigation into the ancient texts draws to its close, the focus shifts from the past to the horizon. If the cycles are real, what constitutes the final signal? It would likely be an astronomical anomaly, not merely the sighting of Nibiru, which may be difficult for the general public to verify, but perhaps a cascading series of geophysical events tied to its gravitational influence, increased seismic activity, radical climate shifts, or a sudden, unexplained surge in solar radiation. Alternatively, the signal might be internal, a widespread, spontaneous awakening of those dormant genetic sequences, granting certain individuals faculties or longevity previously thought mythological. Whether external or internal, this signal would mark the closing chapter of our independent development and the opening of a new, potentially terrifying era of accountability to our original architects. The unfolding destiny is thus defined not by human will alone, but by the parameters established millennia ago in the Mesopotamian laboratories. If the Anunnaki exist, and if they engineered us, then our future is inextricably linked to their return schedule and their intentions for their ongoing project. The final realization is one of profound mystery. We have solved the riddle of our past only to confront the impossibility of our future. We are not masters of our house. We are part of an incredibly sophisticated, millennia-spanning experiment, waiting for the researchers to return and check their results. If you have stayed with us through this extensive 9-part journey, you are not merely a viewer, but a fellow seeker of forbidden knowledge, someone who recognizes that the deepest truths often lie hidden in the quietest corners of history. If this narrative of our engineered origins, of the Anunnaki's role in shaping human DNA, has resonated with your curiosity, I urge you now to ensure you are subscribed to the channel. Hit the like button to signal the importance of this historical deep dive, and please leave a comment with the exact phrase, the 23rd chromosome, a simple code to mark your recognition of the key anomaly. Our investigation continues beyond this series, pushing the boundaries of what is considered accepted history, and the next piece of the puzzle is waiting for you now on the screen. Do not let the amnesia take hold. Remain vigilant in your pursuit of the truth.